After spending hundreds of hours in the base game and another 100 completing the DLC, Elden Ring has cemented itself as my third favorite game ever. There's tons of people who think From Software games are popular solely because of their difficulty, and completing them proves your real gaming skills, and while there is a little truth to that sentiment, that's not my reason. This is number 3 for me because Elden Ring is art. Good art direction and a unique visual style in games are far more important to me than just having impressive photorealistic graphics. The Dishonored series, Prey, and Mirror's Edge are some of my favorite games solely because of their style and art direction. And before I go into any further detail, just so we're all on the same page, graphics refers to the more technological side of things, the amount of polygons in models, rendering, lighting, and ray tracing. Basically the quality and how detailed everything will look, and art direction is more about the overall aesthetic and style. The atmosphere, the color palette, the design of props, characters, and architecture in that setting that brings everything together in a cohesive way to fully immerse you in that world. So, in short, graphics are about looks, and art direction is about the style, feel, and mood of the game, and From Software are masters of art direction. I've started collecting video game art books because of Elden Ring. I had to know what some of this concept art looked like, because it's had such a huge impact on me. I'm a graphic designer, I love art and design, and I'm obsessed with this game, so I wanted to talk about its art direction and world design. The first video I did on Elden Ring was why I loved it from a gameplay perspective, but this video is why I love it from the perspective of a graphic and visual designer, so hopefully I can explain it in a way that lets you see Elden Ring through my eyes and the way I see this game. For the base game, there doesn't seem to be one overall theme. It's like they said, we're going to build one of the coolest fantasy worlds ever by tying together regions that follow their own theme and visual direction, and they did that. This imagery is what you're greeted to when you get up the elevator. This is your introduction to the lands between. This screams welcome to our world. The tone of the music that's playing, everything is a luscious green, the wildlife in the area are passive. The golden rays coming down from the Earth Tree that you can see all the way in the capital city in the back, and its leaves are reaching this far and floating around you. They really wanted to show off their visuals, and they understand that first impressions matter. There's nothing inherently visually threatening to the player here. Sure, there's a giant guy on a horse that's 20 feet away from you and his size might be intimidating, but compared to the rest of the enemies in this game, his visual design is not a threatening one. He's just a giant armored guy on a horse. This is a very beginner-friendly area in its appearance and also how it feels. Now, Stormviel in the distance is where you're instructed to go. This is the one thing that looks visually out of place and not so welcoming, because the shape language is different. It's the only thing in sight that's spiky and has sharp edges from the rocks and the shape of the surrounding cliffs. Assuming you went straight to the castle as directed, after beating Margit, this is your view. The introduction is now over. The design language has completely changed here. This is full-on scary and threatening. If you want to make something appear less friendly, the first thing you want to do is introduce a lot of sharp edges and make it uneven. Get rid of any smoothness. It's the same approach I have when I'm choosing fonts that have to match the theme of whatever I'm designing. If I want something to appear friendly, I look for fonts that are uniform or very curved, but if you want something to have a threatening look, add spikes, make it jagged, get rid of any uniformity and make it distorted, and we can see that here with just the beginning of Stormviel. These insanely tall tower ramparts with spikes adding to the castle's intimidating entrance while making you feel small at the same time. Huge chunks of the structure are missing, support beams sticking out like broken bones, there's rubble everywhere with tons of weapons but no signs of the soldiers they belong to, painting a very vivid image of how the siege of Stormviel went during the Shattering. All of this before you even step foot inside. And as for the weird holes and vines growing on the walls and intertwined in the guts of the castle, well, let's just say some fates are worse than death rooted under Stormviel. Now, as badly as this looks, you can't help but wonder what the hell happened here, and now you want to go inside. This is what I mean by From Software are so good at creating that mood and atmosphere that makes a player curious to explore. However, on your way to Stormviel, you can tell you're getting closer. You go from the grassy plains of the starting area to a brick road that leads you to a small town over a hill. That guides you through the gates of Stormhill right to a tunnel, but once you're on the other side of that, there is no more foliage. You're surrounded by brick, metal, wood, and Godric's abominations. There's always a gradual visual transition into a new region, and it subtly starts with the environment. If you didn't notice it yet, for Stormviel, it's your introduction of spikes. It's the first thing you see in the distance from the jagged cliffs. The barricades you go through increase in number as you get closer, and it serves a double purpose. You're going towards a castle that's under siege, so it makes sense the defensive fortifications increase the closer you get, but the design language changing with the increase in pointy shapes is also psychologically telling you the tutorial is over and you are heading towards danger. Now, if we weren't able to use a spoken language to warn somebody there's danger or death ahead, then you use a universal language that humans understand, which are feelings and emotions. You make them feel uncomfortable through the use of shapes that are sharp, like spikes, barbed wire, even the biohazard symbol or skulls. All of these convey danger to somebody. And I love that this game uses a lot of different ways to convey that to the player. They're about to be in danger if they keep heading this way, which is what you're seeing on your way to Stormviel. Also, the rich green of the beginner area slowly fades away into the grays, browns, and golds of the castle and its rubble. You can always tell where you are in the world just by the change in colors, but there are much finer details all around you telling you exactly where you are. There's the banners and crests on the enemies because they fight for different factions in different regions. The color association and color psychology in Elden Ring is perfect in my opinion. Limgrave is green because it's the largest concentration of nature on the map, yes, but green is associated with safety and calmness, and this is also the easiest area in the game, which is why it's the beginner area. Like I said, your introduction to this game isn't a threatening one visually, and this is part of the reason why. Now, Lernia of the Lakes is blue because of, the lake and the introduction of sea creatures, but blue is a common color in the visual theme here because it's associated with glintstone magic, the moon, and water, but blue is representative of open spaces, wisdom, and intelligence, and here is where you'll find the most magic users and glintstone crystals. And which stat do you need to be able to use magic spells? So yeah, everything ties together. Now, Caelid is a bright red post-apocalyptic wasteland. I love watching new players walk into Caelid for the first time because everyone's reaction is the same every time. They're like, am I supposed to be here? Something's wrong and I don't feel safe. Earlier I mentioned you can make people feel uncomfortable through the use of shapes and iconography, but you can also do this with colors, and red is the main one. In a lot of our real-world signage, a lot of things that can kill you is a threat or, screams danger is marked with red. Biohazard signs, explosives, flammable material, police sirens, even computer error codes and stock prices. We have been psychologically trained that red equals bad. So seeing a place like Caelid where literally everything is red, including the sky, immediately makes people feel uncomfortable and panic because the sense of danger is immediately conveyed. And it's the same thing with the Grand Cloister and Mogwin's Palace. And for good reason. These are not fun places to be in. I love color psychology. I can talk about how the use of different colors affects people and, how they feel all day, but I'll stick to Elden Ring. So we'll circle back to Caelid a bit later. However, it's not just the environmental design. I'm not sure if they made the regions first and then the bosses to match, or made the bosses first and then the region based on them, but bosses feel like the conclusion to that region, and their castles visually represent them. So you get a feel for that boss before you even meet them. Godric and Stormviel, for example, they're both, broken, old, decrepit, and something is clearly wrong with them. But the enemies you fight and the color schemes all match. He mirrors Stormviel. Then Renala and the Academy, phase 1 of the fight in the library is a good representation of the Academy itself, because the students are who you're fighting in phase 1, not Renala. The brown and gold color palettes of the library matches the interior of the Academy, which you travel through, but phase 2 is a visual design change to blue. Again, the color association with water, the moon, glintstone magic, and we get a cameo from Ranni and the other monsters you fought in this region as spirit summons. So this fight is representative of the entire region of Lernia. Now, over to the east is General Rodan and Redmane Castle, except his castle looks a bit different from the typical ones we've been to before. The difference between a castle and a fortress is that a castle is a combination of a palace for comfort and a fortress for defense. This leans more towards that fortress aesthetic compared to the other castles. The barricades, catapults, and a tower with a ballista watching whoever comes across the bridge ready to shoot on sight, and the tall ramparts giving a 360 view around the castle with soldiers ready to defend their post. So a castle with a war raging on the inside and ready to fight whoever is on the outside is all very fitting for a boss that's a warmongering general, who isn't even inside the castle. He's across the river fighting whoever is brave enough to step up to the challenge. So the color scheme, the enemies you fought, the environment, and the visual design of the castles themselves is all summarized into the design of a single character. The bosses represent an entirety of a region, and that's why they feel like the conclusion of a region to me when you finally meet and kill them. Lyndell is the one area that visually stands out to me because it doesn't feel like it fits into the game. That's because it feels like it's the closest thing to our actual world. This is a big visual change from the 13th century medieval castles lower in the map. It's a mixture of ancient Greek and Romanesque architecture. I did a ton of Googling for references and it seemed like they used both. These large walkways with high walls and buildings leading into the city. The design of the columns and even the rooftops all seem to be referenced from these older civilizations in the design of this city. The layout itself of Lyndell, of the streets and buildings all around each other, is Greek urban planning. It's kind of like a concrete favela almost, just buildings scattered around each other. Roman city planning is more rectangular and grid-like. The buildings are more isolated from each other, kind of like this. And if this looks familiar, it's because our modern urban and city planning is based off of ancient Rome and how they built their cities, so yeah, this looks like an American city block. So this is why I said it feels like Lyndell is the closest thing to our reality, but it also feels more modern because Lyndell is where royalty is. You can see the wealth everywhere around you. The scale and height of the outer walls, buildings and statues are very grandiose. Even the design of the ladders and switches have more flair to them. The props here are very different. The interiors are more detailed and look more expensive than anywhere else on the map. Also, going back to the color association, gold is everywhere in this region, and that color is symbolic of wealth, riches, and extravagance, and that is on full display when you get into the capital. And while there is wooden furniture like in the other castles, everything here has engravings on it and gold accents. The beds look better, the chairs have cushions, and the golden earth tree symbol is hanging from banners all over the city. But the wealth isn't just in the environment and finer details of the props. Even the enemies here are better dressed. There's knights everywhere that have gold cloaks and shields instead of the usual red. The use of these materials and gold colors give a certain feeling, and changing those can set a very different tone and mood in an instant. And that is exactly what happens when you go down a well to the side of Lyndell that it doesn't want you to see, where it hides the people it doesn't want you to see. Lyndell has a working sewer system called the Shunning Grounds, where the deformed omens are imprisoned when they're born, like Mohg and Margot. And if you go to explore down there, you'll find an item called Mohg's Shackle, where you can use it in his fight to imprison him again, like in his younger years under Lyndell. The fact you can find an item used on Mohg in his youth is insane world building and what I love about the game. So remember Caelid? It's a giant wasteland because in the lore, Malenia and Radahn fought there. She uses her Scarlet Aeonia ability, a flower that blooms, and she didn't hold back, and it completely ravaged the entirety of that region, spreading scarlet rot everywhere, which could only be contained by fire. This is why you see walls of fire on the boundaries of Caelid. It looks threatening as if they're trying to keep you out, but those walls are there to keep the scarlet rot in. Knowing about this fight explains the scarlet rot swamps, the enemy types, the flowers, and overall red atmosphere and color schemes, and why you can find a needle on an enemy in the middle of the swamp. This needle belonged to Malenia and it stalls the effects of scarlet rot. The same needle that was destroyed before she let the scarlet rot take over her body so she could attempt to kill Radahn. In the beginning of the video, I said it seemed like they just wanted to make the coolest fantasy world ever with different regions, but that's the impression I had as a first-time player. Now that I'm very deep into the lore of Elden Ring, it completely changed the way I look at the map and the art direction of the different regions. In my other playthroughs, the regions have a lot more meaning now. Everything means something. This is environmental storytelling to an insane degree. The map almost feels like a character itself. These regions are visually designed in a way that tell pieces of the overall story, what happened in the past and its effect in the present day. And you're experiencing and seeing the lore all around you in the different environments. Caelid went from being a red wasteland to now I look at it as proof of not only how strong Malenia is, but how far these two cursed Empyrean siblings will go for each other. Miquella is trying to cure Malenia of scarlet rot and figured out unalloyed gold slow down the spread of it. That explains why she has this gold armor and prosthetic arm and the gold needle. Her armor looks amazing, yes, but it's not just for aesthetic, it is temporarily saving her. And she removes all of that and lets scarlet rot consume her to get an advantage in the fight to kill Radahn, because Miquella needs him for his plans to ascend to godhood. They will go to extreme lengths for each other. The other interesting thing about Elden Ring's art direction is how it completely changes when you go away from the main map. The top layer of the map is very medieval themed with lots of fantasy elements in it, but it does a complete 180 when you go underground. It's just 110% pure fantasy in its design. Even the way the Riverwell elevators look visually stand out from their surroundings before you see what's waiting for you underneath. Everything about the design of it just seems like it's not from this world. And then you go down there and you see the giant ants, underground caves, and you make your way to the eternal city of Nokron and Nokstella. Two cities under an eternal night sky, and these cities look very different from the rest of the game. They're more gothic in appearance with silver furnishings along the structures, but silver is used for the objects in the environments and the enemy's armor. Silver is used everywhere, from the street lamps, chairs, metal bars, and hanging chandeliers lit with blue flames. Now with the switch from red to blue flames, this subtle change in the color of the lighting completely changes the mood. It makes down here feel a bit more ethereal, because blue flames aren't something you see very often, and the rest of the lighting is from the fake night sky above. This place is home to the Nox Society, a race of grey-skinned people who forge weapons from liquid metal of the Silver Tears, and you see a lot of these creatures, the blobs that can mimic other enemies, and you even have one. The gothic aesthetic of their city, use of silver metals, armor, and weapons of the Nox, in my opinion, almost rivals Lyndell in terms of how wealthy it looks. And part of that is because of the high ceilings, the large circular windows, the pointy arches, and the use of the support beams here called flying buttresses, which allow the buildings to have these really high ceilings, which are all defining features of Gothic architecture, which is further ahead in time, around the 14th to 16th century. While the architecture above is styled after castles ranging from the 10th to the 13th century. So the Nox may have been a more advanced society just from the appearance and design of their cities. Now, if you light all 8 of the altars hidden in the ancestral woods, you can interact with the bones, which take you to fight the giant ancestral deer. This is one of my favorite non-humanoid boss fights in terms of its design. Another favorite is Astel. Another boss down here. It looks very alien in nature because it is. There's a lot of lore behind why this boss is down here. It fell from space to destroy an eternal city, which is alluding to the Nox Society in their city. But the gravity abilities, teleportation, and the fact that its eye is in its forehead of the skull, and it has this universe pattern, yeah, I love its design. So the change in mood, the blue lighting, and the gothic design of the buildings and enemies is part of the reason the art direction down here doesn't look anything like on the surface, and it just has this extraterrestrial feel to it. But it's not just the underground. Let's go back up to even above the surface. Again, it's just pure fantasy. The crumbling Azula looks like something straight out of Doom Eternal. This floating crumbling temple is home to the dragons that houses death, both literally and figuratively. It has the same designs that match up with the chunks of debris scattered all over Limgrave. As for how it got to this state, apparently it was destroyed by a meteor. Some people think it's the Elden Beast, others think it's Astel, myself included. But I think I've given enough evidence that everything you see in this game has a lore reason for being exactly where it is. And the last thing I want to touch on is the fact that this is a very religious game. In the medieval times, they were very religious. Huge churches and cathedrals in England and Europe, crosses on their armor and weapons, and they mirror that very well in-game. Queen Marika is a god. She's at the top of the hierarchy. She's not present for 99% of the game, but her presence is definitely felt. We hear about her in game's dialogue, and she's referenced a lot, but we also see her everywhere. They worship her, they build churches and shrines in her name, there's statues of her scattered all across the land. We respawn at Stakes of Marika, the summoning pools is also her as well. Their dedication and devotion to her is very evident. Actually, the very first steps you take when you start this game, you're greeted by a large statue of her. This is all religious imagery and themes. Everything you see, a statue of her, books, paintings, or even the churches, instead of Marika or any of the demigods, you imagine it's Jesus, a Buddha, any of the Japanese, Chinese, or Greek gods, whatever religion you want, any of them would fit. They did an excellent job implementing the religious imagery well, not only just in-game and in the visuals, but it's also thematically interwoven into the gameplay itself. Having a faith build, and you can use holy weapons and spells from the Golden Order that will stop enemies who live in death from respawning, or the lightning spells from dragons, because they were considered lords and gods any time before the Earth Tree. You can be a part of the Dragon Communion that lets you have the ability to use dragon spells. The Golden Order isn't the only religion either. It's why there's so many endings you can have, from following other NPCs and their beliefs and religions, because Marika and the others, they're just the inner gods. They're the gods that you can see. There's also outer gods and influences outside of the lands between that influence what happens in-game with certain characters as well. You can burn the entire world down if you want. So there's churches and altars and statues of these gods and figures everywhere as well, not just Queen Marika. But I think the imagery of Marika's all over the world is because she is the core of the Elden Ring story. Her weird family tree, the demigod children and stepchildren, everything that happened in the lands between, if you follow the breadcrumbs, all trails lead back to Marika and the Shattering. And a lot of answers are hidden in plain sight, in the environment, the weapons, and armors. Clues and answers for everything can be found throughout the visuals, it's just for you to connect the dots. The story, the world, everything, it's all centered around Queen Marika. I haven't even talked about the gameplay, but all of this is why Elden Ring is one of my favorite games ever, purely from an artistic standpoint. The world design, environmental storytelling, art direction, and rich lore are all tied together to tell a story in a very unconventional way. Again, nobody does art direction like From Software. And playing this game has gotten me to be more open-minded about the fantasy genre. I never thought knights and horses were cool until playing this game, but I see the potential of how cool the fantasy genre can be now with how creative the armor sets and weapons can be, the different types of dragons, and especially the castles. As somebody that likes architecture and buildings, yeah, the fantasy and medieval buildings are basically the blueprints of what inspired a lot of the style of buildings that I like. I'd like to make a video on the art direction of the DLC in the future because after all that I talked about today, the DLC's art direction is way better and I like it more than the base game. But for now, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I've been working on this video for a really long time, since last year, and if you haven't done it yet, go play Elden Ring.